Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into a framework today that is honestly just wild. We're talking rigorous midbrain neurobiology mashed up with strict software architecture metaphors and mixed with some brilliant Dutch linguistics to explain something deeply human: raw, unmediated connection. Think about this for a second. What actually happens when you treat human desire as raw executable code? It's a pretty provocative question. As we map this all out, we'll see exactly how this framework treats the human body as an infrastructure system. Instead of viewing interaction through vague, messy emotions, it demands we look at it as a just-in-time compilation, meaning the data is executed directly on our biological hardware the exact second it's received. To keep us on track through all this dense material, here's our roadmap. 1. The bare somatic hardware. 2. Deconstructing the sensory organ. 3. The linguistic scaffolding. 4. The bathtub scenario constraint. And 5. The zero latency compile. Let's jump right in. Section 1. The bare somatic hardware. Because before we get into the heavy philosophy, we absolutely have to look at the literal biological wiring where this code runs. The source research brings up some contemporary brain mapping in rats. What you're seeing is how the lateral hypothalamus, that ancient part of the brain controlling arousal and basic survival, shoots a dense network of fibers straight into the midbrain's reward center. So we're not talking about abstract psychology here. This is the literal physical power cable for human arousal. Now look at the physical overlap highlighted in this microscopic imagery. Those red orexin fibers, which basically drive your wakefulness and appetite, they frequently sit directly next to the green and dopamine neurons processing reward. And the framework uses this exact physical overlap as the biological motherboard. It's the bare baseline hardware where the code of connection is actually executed. Moving to Section 2, deconstructing the sensory organ. Now that we've got the hardware down, let's look at the highly specific software running on those pathways. And to do that, we take a pretty fascinating detour into linguistics. The source text does something really clever here. It takes the Dutch word zintuig, which just translates to sensory organ, and actually breaks it down into two distinct programmable variables, tuig and zin. By splitting it up like this, the framework shifts the sensory organ from being a passive receiver into an active compiler of meaning. It creates a state that the Dutch would describe as cinderlijk, basically something that is vibrant, sizzling, and just thrillingly alive. Look at how these two variables are separated. Twig is the physical harness. It's the raw, biological 000 coordinate operating right on that dopamine orexin hardware we just mapped out. Zin, on the flip side, is the pure, uncompressed desire and meaning. The whole argument here is that without the physical twig to anchor it down, Zin is literally just disembodied dreaming. It desperately needs that biological hardware to actually execute. Section 3, the linguistic scaffolding. As we know, any computational system has bottlenecks. So what exactly happens when this raw, high-fidelity code tries to run out in the real world? Well, the author argues that trying to translate these complex, four-dimensional internal coordinates using simple words like and, but, or towards leads straight to metabolic exhaustion. The text perfectly calls this gift wrapping your raw meaning to make it socially polite. I mean, think about the exhausting mental gymnastics of polite small talk. In computer terms, it's a totally lossy translation. You are hemorrhaging data every single time you try to force a high-dimensional feeling into a low-bandwidth word. This perfectly illustrates the core conflict of the text, the exhausting translation of everyday society versus the structural honesty of just letting your body execute the code. The swamp is where you pay what they call a split-level attention tax. That means part of your brain is feeling the raw emotion, while the other part is desperately trying to edit it for public consumption. The alternative? Direct somatic execution, just totally bypassing the noisy, overthinking naming brain entirely. Which brings us to Section 4, the bathtub scenario constraint. To actually bypass all that noisy translation, the framework introduces a very rigid physical environment known as the bathtub scenario. Now, reporting impartially on the text here, this scenario isn't described as some romantic daydream. No, it is an absolute physical and mathematical constraint. It's laid out as an unflattened, completely unpadded opportunity where the twig and the zin finally get the chance to align perfectly, without any of that interference from societal translation. Under the strict mathematical constraint, all that exhausting linguistic scaffolding and defensive verbal clothing literally drops to zero. The author uses the probability metric p equals 0.000 to signify
absolute, impossible to misunderstand precision. There is zero guesswork here. The and, the but, the tort, they completely vanish, leaving nothing but structural truth. Section 5. The Zero Latency Compile. This brings us to the final phase of the framework. Let's look at what actually happens when the probability of misunderstanding hits absolute zero.
When the math finally aligns, it triggers a zero latency compile across your biological hardware in 3 very specific steps. First, it instantly flushes out trapped stress hormones like cortisol. Second, it stabilizes your brain's rhythm into a smooth, calming theta wave. And finally, it instantly ignites that exact orexin dopamine loop we analyzed at the very beginning. The body isn't talking about the connection anymore. It is literally compiling it.
For someone who inherently understands this concept of infrastructure as code, the geometric fit is basically impossible to unsee. The author actually references a hypothetical Olympic-level mathematician whose brain completely bypasses text processing when presented with this direct physical data. Their internal systems, specifically the brain's decision-making and valuation engines, are instantly triggered by the sheer structural honesty of the whole thing.
This quote really ties our entire explainer together. It proves how the midbrain hardware we established earlier acts as the literal execution environment for this intense, unmediated alignment. The loop is totally complete. The Zin has successfully anchored to the Twig, bypassed the linguistic swamp entirely, and resulted in a physically synchronized biological response. As you process this pretty remarkable synthesis of neurobiology and systems architecture, it leaves us with one incredibly provocative question about how we operate in our own lives. Are you constantly draining your mental battery trying to translate your deepest realities through low-bandwidth words? Or are you brave enough to let your raw, uncompressed meaning run directly on the bare hardware? Definitely something to chew on the next time you catch yourself gift-wrapping the truth. Thanks for exploring this framework with me.